Hello, everyone. I'm Hans Engel from the Directors Guild of Canada. Welcome to our 11th episode of DGC Masterclass via Zoom. These are unprecedented times beyond anyone's imagining. The DGC recently posted this statement. The DGC is an organization that is strengthened by the talents and passion of diverse creatives and crew. We stand together in solidarity with the Black community and all those who still face discrimination and hate, to fight for a society free of systemic racism. Black Lives Matter. These are incredibly challenging times like nothing we've ever faced before, which makes me even more grateful that you're joining us here tonight. We must be vigilant and engaged, and I believe that in order to engage at this level, we must also find time to disengage and recharge. Through these masterclasses, we're bringing you together with some of the most interesting creatives in the industry today. The DGC prides itself on being the place where the creative community comes together to celebrate and discuss the work. We're going behind the scenes and talking to some of the top creatives in the industry, covering directors, designers, picture and sound editors. You'll receive a new invitation with a specific link to tune in. And sometimes it's once, twice, and this week, 3 times during the week. So far, we've had Emmy-winning director Jean-Marc Vallée, Emmy-winning editor Kelly Dixon, Oscar-winning designers David and Sandy Wasco, a special event with brilliant Indigenous filmmaker Jeff Barnaby, 2-time Oscar-nominated doc filmmaker Firas Fayyad, 2-time Oscar-winning sound editor Karen Baker-Landers, Oscar and Palme d'Or nominee Adam Agoyan, Oscar-nominated designers KK Barrett and Patrice Vermette, Maverick filmmaker Bruce McDonald, and Oscar-nominated director, writer, producer, and actor Sarah Polley. All those can be found on the DGC National and DGC Ontario YouTube channels. Tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator. He's the artistic director and co-head of the Toronto International Film Festival and the TIFF organization. He's responsible for the overall vision and execution of festival programming and for maintaining relationships with the Canadian and international film industries. For 7 consecutive years, 2012 to 2018, Toronto Life has named him one of Toronto's 50 most influential people. He grew up in England and Barbados before migrating to Canada. He began programming for TIFF in 1990, headed the organization's Perspective Canada program, founded its Planet Africa section, and worked both as a film programmer and film critic for 20 years before taking on his current role, contributing to Toronto's Now Magazine, CBC Radio 1, and CTV's Canada AM. He presented international cinema nightly on Showcase TV's national program, The Showcase Review, and produced and hosted the interview program Filmmaker on Independent Film Channel Canada. He's been published in the Globe and Mail, The Village Voice, Cine Action, and Screen, among others. You would think he's 90 years old, but he's not. Please welcome Cameron Bailey.
Thank you. Thanks, Hans. I am almost 90 years old, and that is a very long introduction. I apologize to everyone watching.
I had to read it. It's amazing and impressive. And frankly, I remember, which speaks to my age, you as a critic on TV and those early days of programming. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's featured guest. He's one of Canada's foremost film directors. His feature films have premiered at TIFF, Sundance, and Berlin film festivals. His movies include Poor Boy's Game, Lie With Me, and Love Come Down. His first feature, Rude, premiered at the 1995 Cannes Film Festival. His TV directing credits include The Wire, Billions, American Crime, Empire, and Greenleaf, on which he served as director and executive producer with Oprah Winfrey. Greenleaf won the NAACP Award for Best Drama Series in 2019. In 2015, he directed, co-wrote, and executive produced the miniseries adaptation of The Book of Negroes, which was amazing, which debuted to record-breaking numbers on the CBC and BET in the US, and was nominated for 2 US Critics' Choice Television Awards and shortlisted for a Peabody Award. Additional accolades include the 4 2015 NAACP Image Award nominations, including the win for Best Screenplay. He won the DGC Award for directing for television for Book of Negroes. He's currently prepping his next feature film, Brother, and co-show running the upcoming Netflix series Bloom for Michelle and Barack Obama's Higher Ground Productions. Welcome, Clement.
Hey. Hans, I think you forgot one thing on Cameron's resume.
What's that?
Cameron and I did a movie together. We wrote a movie together.
Yes, we could talk about that too.
Yes.
Talk about that.
The Planet Junior Brown.
Planet Junior Brown, 20 years ago. Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Hans, DGC, and Cameron. Thank you for doing this.
Of course.
Much appreciation.
So usually Clement and I would be having a glass of rum or something when we have a conversation. A little bit different, but these are different times.
Yes, it is.
Virtual rum.
You know, it's funny. I think the last time I saw you was just before, I think the day before Toronto, the whole city sat down. We were having rum.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we will again.
Yes.
One of these days.
Before I turn it over to these guys, I've got to let the audience know about the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That's the way to send in questions to Cameron and Clement. Press on the Q&A button, type your questions in. Cameron will be watching that box throughout the evening, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but know that he may not be able to get to all of them. So have a great talk. Really looking forward to it. Over to you guys.
All right, Hans,
thank you
so much. And thanks everybody who've taken the time to watch and listen. Clement and I go back a long way. We were just talking to Amanda Paris, and that brought up memories because she wrote this great article about she continues to write articles about the history of the arts and Black creativity in this country. And the Black Film and Video Network is where we first met, going back to the late 80s. And then I watched you make your first short films and your first feature film. And what's weird is I was just thinking that the time then feels a little bit similar to the time now. This was the era of Rodney King, protests in the street. We didn't have a pandemic then, but we had a lot of what we're seeing now on TV as well. Can you talk a little bit about that moment when you became a filmmaker, how you got to just get your start as a filmmaker, and what that environment was at the time?
Yeah, it's funny that you should talk about that, Cameron, because I think I met you, it might have been the summer or the fall of 1989. And that summer, Do the Right Thing came out.
That's right, yeah.
Do the Right Thing came out, and that film was such a powerful movie, and that song by Public Enemy, Fight the Power, was such a powerful song. And I remember at the time I was trying to transition into film. I was like, I think 21, 22, and I worked in fashion at the time. I was doing window displays and putting on fashion shows and things like that, and trying to figure out if I could be a filmmaker. And then I saw, the first film I saw was She's Gotta Have It in '86, and that kind of sparked my, made me feel like, oh, maybe if this kid from New York, if he could do it, perhaps I could do it. And I went out and bought his book. Spike had written a diary about his experience of trying to make She's Gotta Have It, and that became my sort of Bible about how to do it. And then, of course, 3 years later, he came out with Do the Right Thing. And so, yeah, I think that's a summer I joined the Black Film and Video Network for the first time. Coming into a room and seeing other people that look like me, and I think that's the first time I think I saw you around the table.
That's right. I mean, so many things. This is like ancient history now, but so many things feel like they're echoes. The Black Film and Video Networks was founded in part as a way of honoring Jennifer Hodge, who was a filmmaker who made documentaries with the National Film Board. And she made one film called Home Feeling: Struggle for a Community.
That's right.
On the NFB site now, if you want to check it out. It is so relevant to what's going on right now. It's about the Jane Finch neighborhood in Toronto, in the suburbs, and how that neighborhood is policed and under surveillance by the police, how the people there are struggling not just with that police presence, but also with trying to find jobs and just trying to survive. And really, although, you know, the clothing's a little different and the style is dated, but it feels like it's a very similar story. So you joined the Black Film and Video Network. You also went to the Canadian Film Center under a program that they set up to try to get some new voices into the film world.
Yeah. So during the sort of the late 80s, early 90s, I was trying to figure out how to make films. And I made a couple short films. And then in 1991, the CFC, Canadian Film Center, had a program, initiative called for filmmakers of color. So it was a summer lab for filmmakers of color. And in that lab, that's where I met Mina Shum out in Vancouver, you know, one of our great filmmakers. You know, that's where I met Karen King, who's one of our producers in town. That's where I met my producer, who I'm still working with to this day, Damon D'Oliveira. That's where I met, you know, that's where I met Stephen Williams. Stephen Williams is one, you know, just in the past year got nominated for Watchmen, a DGA award for the Watchmen. So that was a kind of seminal year for all these like young filmmakers of color from across the country to have a chance to kind of practice their craft. And that was sort of an initiative set up by Wayne Clarkson and, you know, and Norman Jewison, who's one of our great filmmakers, set up the CFC. And he is subsequently, I met him there, and he was and he's been my mentor ever since.
Let me just take a moment and say, if you're running an arts institution right now and you have the power to do what Wayne Clarkson did back in the early 90s, do it. Because there is another generation of Clement Virgos and Mina Shums out there who just need that first opportunity. I don't know what you would have done, or Mina or Stephen or the others would have done if you hadn't had that first step up, but it makes a huge difference.
It made a massive difference. It makes you, you know, at that time, it gave me confidence. You know, it made me feel like I was legit as a filmmaker, and it was a chance to, you know, practice a craft. You know, they had equipment there, so I could use a video camera, and they provided actors, and you know, I could spend the whole summer just really trying to figure out how to be a filmmaker and how to be a writer. Mm-hmm. It was a great program, and I think at the time there was a sense that that was a possibility. You know, that things were opening up a little bit. I think because at that time, remember, you know, we had Boys in the Hood was coming out came out in '91. You know, the Hudlin brothers were doing their thing. You know, over in England, Isaac Julian was making Young Soul Rebels. You know, so and out of Africa, you know, Sam Ben was still making the movie. So there was a movement, you know, sort of Pan-African movement that was happening, and so it was a great moment.
Mm-hmm. I see a couple of comments and questions coming in on the chat line. I want to ask you to also use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can use that. Questions will pop up and I'll see those. But let me just ask you a little bit more about just, you know, the journey from then to now, Clement, because, you know, these days you're directing some of the top TV series in the US. You're working with Oprah Winfrey, the Obamas, all kinds of people. Right. And it's a long way from there to here, of course. And also, you've been able to really work across the border very easily. It's not that you just moved to LA, you still live in Toronto, but you work a lot of the time in the US. And can you talk a little bit about what that is like as a filmmaker? I know you're not alone there, but it's got to be a little bit of a strain to be working in both countries.
Yeah, you know, it's my first job that I ever got in the US was on The Wire, if you could believe it.
That too.
And the reason I got that job, I think, was on my first feature film, Rude. I had an actor on there and a director on there, Clark Johnson. And you know, Clark had gotten a job on The Wire, doing I think the second or third episode, and he gave David Simon, who was a showrunner, he gave him a copy of my first film, Rude. And so David Simon saw it, and I got a call from HBO saying, "Would you like to speak to David Simon about possibly directing the show. So I spoke to him on the phone, and then he invited me to come and direct a couple episodes of The Wire. And so that's how I got my first foot in the door. And that's, going back from making my first short film, Save My Lost Nigga Soul, that won the short film at TIFF in '93. Making my first feature film in '95, and then that film became a kind of calling card for my career to jumpstart in the U.S.
Okay. There's a question here from AC. Says, The Wire is so special and unique. Did you have any takeaways or learnings from your experience working on such a memorable project?
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing being in Baltimore that summer, because it was Baltimore, for anyone who's ever been there, as you know, it's a very kind of tense and interesting and dynamic city. And really working it, because up to that point, I was a writer director, someone who had an idea, who wrote their own script, and then try to figure out how to do it. And it was the first time, in a way, I was taking someone else's work and trying to find my way into that work and make it that personal somehow. And I really learned a lot from David Simon, because he's very, very smart. Probably one of the smartest people I think I've ever met, just in terms of his approach. He wanted a very kind of stripped down, verite, almost documentary style. And my style for Rude, as anyone who's seen Rude, is very theatrical and very, in a way, self-conscious. It's very much a first film of a young filmmaker. And so I sort of realized that there is other ways of seeing the Black experience, and having a chance to kind of talk to someone like David Simon and kind of explore what his thinking process was a really, really great experience.
The Wire is now widely seen as one of the very best TV series that was ever made, if not the best one. At the time, did you have any sense of just the historic importance of that series, or was it just a gig in the States?
It was just a gig. It was just a first job. Yeah. There was no, I'd seen that he did a program called The Corner, which came out a couple years previously. But at the time, The Wire was just another show that was about to come out. But I had an inclination. It might be special because there was a scene in one of the scripts that I had to figure out how to direct, and a scene where the two cops coming to a crime scene and all they say is fuck, or a variation on the word fuck. And so I had to figure out how to direct the audience, and how to figure out what is happening. And that scene, every time I said I've done The Wire, people have always asked me about that scene, which is, how did you do that? How did you do that scene? And that scene is probably one of the favorite things that I've ever done. And on that show, I think I also had to kill off Michael B. Jordan on that show.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a tough. That was
at the time, right?
Yes, he was like 16 at the time, 17 at the time, and that was a tough one to shoot. But yeah, they killed off Michael B. Jordan and shooting the scene that all this variations on the word fuck was interesting scene.
Something to remember.
Yeah.
Now, you made a lot of films, but you've also been doing a lot of television since. There's a question here from Jamie Burton-Orr, who asks, do you miss film, or has the television medium been more satisfying for you?
I still consider myself a filmmaker, but over the last little while, as everyone knows, it's very, very difficult to make a living as an independent filmmaker. You almost have to figure out how to be, I call myself two things really. I'm a filmmaker and I'm a hard hat director for hire. And for the last 4 or 5 years of all I've done is episodic television. But there's a film that I've written now that is financed that I'm hoping to get made once COVID is over. So I want to spend the next little while trying to be in my own, projects that I get involved with somehow have to feel a bit personal to me. But you know, I
Talk a little
still.
bit about that project.
Hmm?
Can you talk a little bit about the film project?
The film project it's based on David Chiarendi's book Brother, which is very timely. Which, matter of fact, you told me about. If I remember, that's right.
Right. I hope there's a credit somewhere.
That's right. I remember we were in your office and you had you heard about this book and said you should read it, and I read it a couple months later and bought the rights to it, and so you know, that's a film that I'm hoping to shoot once this is over, and so I have sort of two sort of major projects that I'm working on. I'm working on a project with the Obamas for Netflix, and I'm working on this feature film, Brother.
Okay. You mentioned episodic, and that has been a lot of your work up until the recent film that you're developing. Can you talk a little bit more about that? A lot of people want to know how to get in. It sometimes feels, I'm sure, like there's a little list of directors and a list of craftspeople, and those are the only people who get those gigs. But how, after The Wire, how did you actually begin to get more gigs, and what would you recommend to people who are trying to get it?
Well, I think it started for me, being a writer at the CFC. At the CFC, I was initially brought in as a writer, but I talked my way into directing my first short film.
This is interesting. People don't know that, right? Like, you got in the door as a writer, student or whatever, resident at the Canadian Film Center, but you wanted to direct. And how did you actually convince people that you should be a director there?
Well, while I was there as a writer, I would take every opportunity to direct, 2-minute films, 3-minute film, 5-minute films, and so that the folks up at the CFC could see that I was a director. And so when I wrote my first, the short film, that subsequently became Save My Lost Nigga Soul. I insisted, in a way, I kind of bribed and cajoled and pushed my way into directing my first short film. And so for me, I think if someone wants to get into directing for television, I would recommend that they, if they don't write, find a writer, someone that they could work with, develop a project. And when I started out, it was much harder because we had to had to shoot it on film, you had to figure out the crew. But now, it's in some ways it's a lot easier to make your first short film. And once I made my first short film, and then subsequently my first low budget feature film that went to Cannes, then that feature film got me an agent. And then my agent could then, started pushing me and sending out clips of my films, trying to get me on the phone with producers who could make a difference, who could hire me. But I don't think I could have just gotten a job strictly as a director, if you know what I mean. I had to come into it as a filmmaker as opposed to just a director, because I find it's you get a easier shot if you've written and directed your own film.
Mm-hmm. All right, there's a couple of questions on here from Jamie. Again, what is preparation like for episodic, and could you describe day one on an episodic show?
Day one on an episodic show is the cast and the crew are trying to figure out, can I trust this person? Can I trust this guy? Because sometimes if it's a show that's been on for 2-3 years, they've had a lot of directors come through, and so your first day on the set with your crew and with your cast is can I trust him? Can I follow this person? And can they will they get us home on time?
What do you do to convince people?
Well, no, usually there's like Video Village, and then there are a bunch of chairs behind Video Village, right? And those chairs are usually for the executive producers, all the the people that run the show. And part of what I want to do is to instill enough confidence in them that by lunchtime they've all gone back to their office too.
Because you got this.
Right. And there's no way to, in terms of, there's no way to say you got to accept through your energy, right? And through who you are. And oftentimes, as a director, I'm trying to figure out what kind of director does the actor need from me? What kind of director does this particular crew need from me? What is the culture of that show? And so I'm trying to use my awareness to figure out how to fit in, because I'm a guest. I'm there. I'm a guest. I come in. I do a job, and
For the feature film, because you're not a guest. You're the host when you're the feature film director. That's right.
As the feature film director, you're the host. You've hired everybody. All the actors know that you wanted them, that you've hired them. Every single crew members know that you handpicked them. As a television episodic director, you didn't choose anyone. Maybe you might have chosen a day player if the network or studio says yes to your choices. But so you're coming in, really trying to instill that confidence, really trying to make sure that the actor, the number one on the call sheet, and all the actors could say, "Oh, okay, I like this guy." And I've hired over the last 4 years, I've hired a lot of directors, in the U.S. For the various shows, and I've seen it go very badly, and it usually goes badly in the first day where if the cast feels like they can't trust this person, or they can't be directed by this person, or the crew feels like this person doesn't know what, the key word is they don't know what they want.
Okay, I was going to ask you, what does a director do to show that it's going to go badly? Because they're confused, or they're not clear about what they want?
Yeah, they're confused and they're not clear about what they want. And Norman Jewison gave me a tip very early on in my career that I still use to this day. He said, Norman Jewison said he would take a simple scene, like a car pulling up to a building, an actor getting out and running into the building. Mm-hmm. And he said, Clement, pick a scene that you just do one take. And so, I'll pick a scene and I say, got it, moving on to the next scene. Mm-hmm. And suddenly everyone the crew realizes, oh, we could only get one shot at this. This person knows.
Best game.
Everyone has to be on their best game, and so that's the kind of, that's a tip that Norman Jewison gave to me, that I find a moment where it's a simple scene, a simple shot where someone has to go through a door, do a phone call or something, and I'll just, all right, got it, moving on, next scene.
And you do that early enough in the shoot that it actually has an impact on everything else.
Yes, and and the crew could know, they could feel your preparation, and they could feel your confidence. You know what I mean? They could feel if you're insecure. They could feel if you don't know what you want. They could feel whether or not you're open, or if you're bullied. It's any kind of leadership role. You walk into a room.
It's a little bit like a wolf pack or something, right? They want to know who's the alpha.
You want to know who's the alpha, and you have, and in some ways, you have to figure out how to be the alpha without not being the alpha. In a kind of
dominating, but just
which is a skill.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it's confidence.
There's a question here from Andrea Lang. It says, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Clement on Greenleaf in the role of Vida. We're both Jamaicans. My question is, I'm currently developing a comedic series and not entirely sure how to pitch to network. What's the best method or advice you have for her?
I'm not the best pitcher in the world, but what are the things that I'm visual, so I usually put together a visual pitch of what it is that I'm trying to sell. And I try to keep it to about 15, 20 minutes, my pitch, and I practice that pitch over and over and over again. So I know it inside out. so that in the room when I'm pitching, I could, if I need to sort of something, if they ask a question that, you know, takes me in another direction, I could sort of improvise with that. But I tend to really, for me, I tend to really need a preparation. I tend to have something a visual aid for them to look at. And, you know, so that they could visualize the world that I'm trying to create.
Okay. There's another question, kind of like a getting in question as well from Hedye. Do you have any advice for feature film writers who are transitioning to writing for television?
The way that I've developed as a writer over the last little while is watching a lot of television and editing television. Editing television taught me more about writing than anything else. And what that did for me was, we all watch television with our finger on the button, right? We all watch Netflix was like, if it's not, you know, if it's not clicking in the first little while, we see what's next on the thumbnail. You know what I mean? You know, you as a programmer, Cameron, I'm sure see thousands of films every year. And
yeah, your attention can drift. And it's not even so much that, you know, a lot of stuff is happening. It's like, what is the rhythm? What is the pace? Does it feel like you're being taken somewhere?
Yes. And do you feel like you're in good hands?
Yes, yes.
That's the biggest thing. Is like, you could tell, you know, within, you know, a page, 2 pages, whether in a screenplay, whether or not you're in good hands. And the only way to do that is to watch a lot of films, feel the rhythm, develop an internal narrative of what films do. And, you know, I think that editing television really informed that for me. And also the sense of mystery and suspense. You know, you could have a slow film, but you have to, the script and the film has to ask right away, make your promise. You know, Cameron, from watching, you know, lots of films who submitted to TIFF, is like, if you feel like a filmmaker, first of all, you're in good hands, and the film starts and they ask you questions. They ask you questions like, oh, let me lean in a little bit, you know, so, because it's like meeting someone, right? Are you interested? You know, you're interested in what they have to say. And then, you know, you subsequently, if you're in good hands, you'll follow through. So I'd say, you know, best way to learn how to write films and TV is to watch a lot of film and TV. As you can tell, I love my DVDs.
DVDs and Blu-rays back there?
Yeah, there's I try to still watch, if I can, 1 movie a day, you know.
That's fantastic.
You know, if I can, because I think that it's, you know, just to, and sometimes I revisit films just to kind of remember, you know what I mean? So, you know, I think if we go, you know, if we're in the business of writing for cinema, writing for film, I find you have to watch, and television you have to watch. There's no way around it.
Well, you know, not every director does. I know, speaking to some other directors, but I find that the directors who've got kind of the richest work usually do watch a lot of other films. And I want to ask you, what films and what filmmakers have you learned the most from in terms of practicing your own craft?
Funny enough, for the last week or so, I've been revisiting Hitchcock.
Oh yeah.
I've been watching. Yeah, because I think Hitchcock to me is cinema. You know, pure cinema. You know, and you know, he was a master of suspense, and really looking at a film like Vertigo again, which I did this past weekend. You know. Looking at a film like North by Northwest, you know, looking at some of his silent films, because it reminds me that it's a visual medium, you know, and so he's someone that recently I've looked at a lot of his work.
Yeah, one thing I love about Hitchcock, you talked about, like, you know, asking questions. It feels like his movies are constantly these kind of unfolding series of questions that keep you kind of leaning in to them, and he's like he's a master of just kind of getting you into the palm of his hand,
and hooking you
along. Like you got no choice.
Yeah. If you look at a film like, say, Rear Window, that opening scene in Rear Window is just brilliant. Is just, you look at it and think, man, just his imagination of panning, down Jimmy Stewart. You see his leg. His leg is broken.
Mm-hmm.
Then you pan across. You realize there's a broken camera. Then you pan up and you realize you see a car crash. And you realize, oh, he's a photographer who just broke his leg and now he's in his apartment.
Right.
Within
no dialogue
within 15 seconds.
Yeah.
It's just it's
right.
genius.
In other movies, there'd be a whole lot of chatter.
About
it's not necessary.
Yes, not necessary.
One other thing I will say briefly, I have shown my son, who's now 11 years old, a lot of Hitchcock movies, and they work really well for kids. And if you're in lockdown and you've run out of, your typical kids movies, go back and show some of the old movies. And as odd as some Hitchcock movies, not Psycho, I wouldn't recommend Psycho, but North by Northwest, Rear Window, a lot of those movies really work.
Yeah.
We got some questions here I want to get to. This is from Kay. Clement, the body of work has always been evolving. How have you managed to maintain your authentic voice, particularly here in Canada? And after authentic, she has blackety black. That's what she means by authentic.
Well, I'm always trying to develop my voice. You go through. For me, I've gone through periods where you think and then you see a film and then you realize, oh, you don't know. So you constantly, for me, I'm always trying to figure out how to remain curious, try to be more authentic with what it is that I'm trying to say. Just really still maintain my curiosity as an artist, and not resting on my laurels, and really still trying to seek out works that push boundaries. I've been inspired in the last few years. It's been really inspiring. Someone like Barry Jenkins is inspiring. You see a film like Moonlight, that inspires you. Damien Chazelle, 33-year-old filmmaker. You look at Whiplash and you think, it's really inspiring. You look at La La Land, you think, oh, you go from Whiplash to La La Land to First Man as a young, filmmaker. I look at someone like, Andrew Arnold, who's you can't, I still like Fish Tank, the end of Fish Tank. I don't know how she did it, but it's just that scene where she's dancing with her mother to Nas, Life's a Bitch. You cannot feel something in that moment. It's just, so I'm constantly looking for inspiration. I'm constantly trying to find my own, refine my voice and to kind of push myself and challenge myself.
Mm-hmm. There's a question here from Zoe. How do you juggle authenticity and cultural sensitivity in a show like The Wire? There's a lot in there. I imagine Zoe's referring to, trying to get that gritty feel, the documentary feel you were talking about, and also not falling into stereotype or anything like that. That's what I'm guessing, but that's a question. Authenticity versus cultural sensitivity.
Well, I think the word I would exchange, I would put in the word specificity.
Okay.
I find, like you look at films from around the world, and I might not know what it's like to be a young woman in West Africa, in the case of a film like, say, Atlantics,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so specific to the place and time and to the culture that you feel it becomes, you feel it, so you could easily fall into imitation, you could easily fall into cliche, but if you ground the work, I find in a kind of specific and honesty, and I feel like audiences feel, I'm convinced, feel when something is authentic, feel when something feels true. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if you're making a sci-fi, Star Wars movie, you know, because sometimes there's a conversation around reality. Something has to be real, and oftentimes I'm not sure what that means. You know, all I know is that do I feel the truth in it? Does it feel honest?
How do you know? How do you know when you've got that?
I think I've directed scenes where I feel like I'm in the zone. I could feel the truth of it. When you have good actors and you have a crew and you know a good crew and you have good photography and you have all the elements that go into a single moment where you know you're shooting a scene and the dolly is being pushed just so and the boom operator is just getting knows exactly when the actress is going to whisper and like gets right in there. You know, there's a kind of like authentic and poetry and truth that comes out in certain moments that you see it and you feel it, and and I'm convinced that audiences recognize it in a work right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you think of those moments. I just watched Sense and Sensibility again, and I watched it with my wife Carolyn and our son Tate, and actually Tate didn't watch that night. But one thing, I hadn't seen it in years, but there's this incredible moment near the end of the movie where Emma Thompson's character kind of collapses. It's just emotional, just upheaval, like she's been seized by everything she's been carrying for the whole movie. And what I didn't know the first time I watched it is that the camera does this incredibly fast tilt down like that with her, because she just collapses into a chair and the camera just goes with her. There's no other shot like that in the whole movie. It's like an action movie shot that's so fast, but it just perfectly matches the character. When you were saying what you're saying about the dolly and the boom and the actors, it feels like that. Like every element has to be in sync, right?
Yes.
That moment.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, and it's remarkable on set where you see it, where you see the big grip who's like cynical and but then the camera operators and all and then you get a moment you realize everyone was in tune to that moment. She probably didn't plan that movement, but because the camera operator was so in tune with what the actress was doing, he felt it, and he felt what was he felt it. Yeah. There was a kind of flow that happens, and you kind of go with it, and you see it all the time in movies.
All right, here's a question from WPS Director. The Wire was 2002 to 2008, over a dozen years ago. Your fuck episode, Bullet Scene, is the best scene ever.
Wow, thank you.
Do you see a direct line from the narratives you were telling back then to what's happening in the world, and especially North America today? What's the responsibility for today's storytellers?
Absolutely. I think, watching some of the images over the last week or so, and witnessing the protest, there is a direct connection to the trying to articulate the Black experience, and sometimes I remember when I made my first film, and I was interviewed by a very prominent journalist in town, and
You're not going to name names tonight.
I'm not going to name names, and I was a young filmmaker, and remember he saying, "Oh, I like your film, but when are you going to make a real movie?"
Which is what?
Which is like, Rude was about Black people. It doesn't really constitute a real story.
People ask Morrison that shit, about her books as well. When are you going to write about people who aren't Black? Like that doesn't count for some reason.
Yes. Like somehow, the Black experience is not a real experience until it's been and you're not a real artist until you kind of make stories that about other essentially the dominant culture, white people. And so I The Wire are even though it was written by a white guy, I think really showed a true American Black experience. I'm not Black American, I'm Canadian, and so I want to do the same thing in my work. I want to depict the authentic Black experience here in this country. And I feel like and now as I'm getting older, I feel more of an urgency to do that. I feel more of an urgency to kind of show that experience on film.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm just going to ask kind of a follow-up to that. We've talked about this before. There are other Black filmmakers here in this country, Charles Officer, Seth Sutherland, so many others who are doing good work. There are people like Don Wilkinson.
Stella, and then he's doing some good work as well.
Who's that?
Stella Maggie.
Oh yeah, Stella Maggie, of course, but Stella's working in the U.S., right? Canadian filmmakers down in the U.S. In terms of actually telling Black Canadian stories, and I know you've done Book of Negroes on television with the CBC, what are the obstacles? Because I feel like there are still some obstacles into getting Black stories told here.
Yeah, look, sometimes you go to, you say you have an idea, you want to pitch your idea to a company. Oftentimes you go to that company and the person that's taking your name to sign you into the building, or that first person that you meet is usually someone of color, usually a Black guy, usually security of some form, right? Mm-hmm. And then the person that comes out to get you, to take you into the meeting, sometimes I find now over the last few years, it's been a person of color. But then the individuals and the people that could actually make the projects,
right,
is rare to find. It's rare to find a person of color in that decision-making role that could actually say yes to your project.
And why
in
does that
Canada
make a difference?
Well, it makes a difference because I remember when I wrote a story when I was a young filmmaker, and someone couldn't understand a cultural reference about, it was about the immigrant experience, right? It was about a mother leaving the child in Jamaica to come to Canada, right? Mm-hmm. And the person couldn't figure it out. They left the child with the grandparents, and the person who was talking to me, who was very smart, couldn't figure out, well, why would the mother leave the child from in Jamaica to go work in Canada? It would not take the child. So it's like, no one from Barbados, Jamaica, or any of the Caribbean countries would ask such a question, because it's obvious.
Right, because if you don't understand, first of all, the barriers to getting into Canada, to starting your life as an immigrant, then you wouldn't be able to understand why that decision would be made. Or that it's just a cultural thing, right?
Cultural thing, yeah.
Leaving kids with grandparents, if they get some of that cultural knowledge when they're young, that's just the thing we do.
It's just the thing we do, right? Right. If someone is in the person of color who understands that, it wouldn't be a question.
Right.
It would just be.
You have to explain just elements of the story that people wouldn't get. Okay. You have to explain part of what why in Rude, I have a lion. My company is called Conquering Lion. Mm-hmm. I have a lion in kind of roaming around Regent Park, and the people are like, well, why do you have this lion roaming around Regent Park? I'm like, no Jamaican would ask that. Right. Yes.
Because it's just, if you ever been to Jamaica, the lion and the Conquering Lion is just a symbol everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah.
you just would, what I mean? So those are the kinds of things. And I think in Canada, and it's a hard one, because in the US, they take the idea of diversity more seriously, I think. Then, part of me feels like there is still a sense of that the idea of diversity is still charity work here. You know what I mean? And that's kind of, we're in the States, I think there is a kind of concrete, mind you, that the history is different, the culture is different, there's a different history, but so I think that there's still work to be done,
right,
here in this country. What do you think? What do you think? You're.
Oh man, don't get me started. we're here to listen to you talk. Yeah, look, I think I think Canada is still struggling to understand what its culture is. I say its culture in the sense of a single culture because it's a culture that has many different parts, of course, but it should be expansive enough to include, a conquering lion, and parents leaving their kids with grandparents, and all of the different things that make up all of our different cultures. That is Canadian culture. That should be how we think of it, right? It's not like a center and margins. It's like we're all part of this mix. And people talk about this multicultural Canada and the mosaic and all of that, and we pride ourselves in that. Diversity, our strength, is the motto of the city of Toronto. But if you look at it in practice, it's still not being practiced entirely. And I think, that all of us have some responsibility for making a change there. Because none of us feel like our own culture and our background and our history is alien to Canada, right?
And I'm speaking as someone who's very grateful, and as someone who's got a start in Canada and who was supported by, some key individuals here in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I still feel like there is a lot to, there's still work to be done to really make have the country, have the work in the country look like when I take the subway.
Yes, very true, very true. All right, we got a bunch more questions. Let me go to Casey. Clement, can you speak to your experiences and professional challenges of shooting Book of Negroes in Cape Town?
Oh, South Africa, Cape Town. When I was in Cape Town shooting the Book of Negroes, I never, you've been to South Africa. There is the history there is everywhere. There is, you could feel that tension of apartheid. You could feel the history of apartheid in every aspect of the culture there. And while I was there, Mandela died. While we were shooting the Book of Negroes, and I went to his memorial, his public memorial, and it was amazing. I remember being on a kind of white sand beach. We were shooting a slave ship scene, and looking around and realizing, I had a moment where I realized I'm in Africa shooting the Book of Negroes. It just sort of hit me and stopped, and I had to sort of stop and had a moment of you had these moments of gratitude, like suddenly, oh right, I'm in Africa shooting the Book of Negroes. But I loved shooting in Cape Town. I love being in South Africa. It was tough. It was hard. It was hot. The experience was challenging, but I wouldn't have traded it for anything. It was a great experience.
Nice. Terene asks, what general advice can you give to playwrights and directors who aren't interested in Hollywood, but interested in having a strong local following as far as audience goes?
Well, a local following, I'm someone I don't have a Twitter, I don't have Facebook, I don't have Instagram, so I couldn't, from that aspect, I couldn't really advise. I'm of the mind, and and Denzel Washington says this, which is, the work is your brand. The work is your brand. So I really focus on the work, and I feel like if you make the work, people will find it. When I made my first short film, you programmed it. And at TIFF, and TIFF is, you can't get any bigger than TIFF in terms of getting exposure as a young filmmaker. So, I never really focused on, only once I make a film, I focus on marketing the film, but I never really focused on trying to find a brand for myself. The film, I focus on, I make a film, I do, I try to figure out how to get people to see it. But in terms of the craft of wanting to, have a following here, I would say every opportunity, especially now in quarantine, I've written more in the last, 3 months than I've had in the last 3 years, simply because I now have it, I'm in a writing room, but I also have the time to really write because I want to incubate. I feel like this is a great opportunity. Over the last little while, it's been a great opportunity to incubate your work, and to work on the craft and to, if you're a writer, to write, so that once quarantine is over, you have work that you've been incubating, work you've been doing. So I would say, take every opportunity if you're a playwright and want to do local work here, just to write it. And I get emails all the time from people, I'm sure like you do, Cameron, people who want to get into business, people who are often looking for advice, and you could tell right away if someone is serious.
Yeah, well, the one thing I think it's important to underline, it should be self-evident, but this is hard work, right? What you're doing and what you've done to get to where you are, nobody handed it to you. You had to go out and do the work. You gotta, work long hours and be away from your family and all those kinds of things. Challenge yourself, improve what you do, not settle for the first or second or third or fourth version, but you gotta keep working at it, right?
Yeah.
And you gotta test yourself all the time, and not everybody's willing to do that. I will say that.
No, not everyone is willing to go through the trials that it's going to take, because you're going to get, like we've all had, painful experiences, negative experiences. We've all had rejection. We've all had our work, criticized, but that's a part of the deal. That's part of the process of being a writer, being an artist, being a filmmaker. And a lot of people think that, it's a cliche. I know it's a cliche about this, but half of it is not even about talent. Half of it is just the ability to kind of say, okay, that hurt. That rejection hurt. I didn't get into TIFF. Mm-hmm. I made a film. Cameron didn't like it, but I'm gonna make another one. Yeah. And I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, resilience, really. I mean, there's 5 words that sometimes, can be very helpful. This will not break me.
That's right.
This will not break me. Whatever happens, this will not break me. And just keep going, right? It is hard to do sometimes, but you got to.
Since we're talking about rejection, let me ask you about, I'm sure there's filmmakers out there, and Cameron Bailey, the head of TIFF, is with us. If I'm a young filmmaker, how do I get my movie into TIFF? What do you look for?
Make a great movie. It's really that simple. I'm joking. Look, we have a great team of programmers. I'm not the only one who decides what gets into TIFF. I'm just responsible for the overall selection. It helps. I mean, we were talking earlier about watching movies. You can tell when you're watching a film that filmmaker has or has not seen enough films to be making the film they're making, because sometimes they're just repeating cliches you've seen a million times before. They may not be aware of that, right? I think it's really important to watch as much as you can to understand what's going on in world cinema. You want to be able to see every film that won the Palme d'Or, the Golden Bear, the Golden Lion, the Golden Leopard, the People's Choice Award at TIFF every year, as well as many other awards, just to see where cinema is right now, right? Like, don't make a movie that feels like it was made 15 years ago without even knowing it. If you're going to do that, be conscious of it, but don't be unaware of where cinema is right now. That's one thing I would say. Don't assume your viewer's attention, right? Too many films assume that the viewer is there to just take in whatever you got to give me, and I'm happy with whatever you give me. We're not. Right. the human mind craves engagement. It doesn't have to be like a fast at all, but you have to give your viewer a reason to keep watching, a reason to feel what you're trying to express, and understand that there's a kind of grammar, vocabulary of cinema where efficiency matters, you know? Now, efficiency doesn't mean fast pace, right? Never make that mistake. It's not the same thing, but it's just how long does this shot need to be? How long does this stretch of dialogue or monologue need to be? And is it the most efficient length, right? So make sure you do that. And then me personally, I happen to like intensity in films, whether it's cinematic intensity in terms of how the camera and the sound and the editing are done, or emotional intensity. That scene I mentioned from Sense and Sensibility, that's like a massive payoff because you feel like the film is slowly building that. It is not a fast-paced film at all, but that payoff is just so intense because of the restraint all the way leading up to it. So those kinds of things I think are at least for me, things that I count as really powerful cinema.
Yeah, and I think what you said about don't assume the viewer's attention. You know, people. You know, and you see it in scripts all the time.
Yeah.
You know, someone will send you a script and it's 130 pages. It's like, you know, it's like, don't send me a script that's 130 pages or 140 pages because you want, you know, it's like because it tells me that you assume that I'm, you know, that I have all the, you know, the 2.5 hours to read, you know, because for a lot of people they've spent a lot of time on this, and so it's important to them. But you have to, there's a kind of rigor, and that the film has to have, the kind of rigor the screenplays has to have, where everything has to be looked at and to say, you know, how am I moving this narrative forward? Especially now, because attention spans are really, really, really short.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, you have to earn people's attention.
That's right. Here's an anonymous question. What are some formative learnings you've had in your career that you would give as advice to your younger self or for younger directors now?
When I was a younger director, I always used to think that I had to be an acting teacher on set. And I would, you know, oftentimes act like the director, you know what I mean? Because, well, you know, you kind of like, you have to talk all the time and you say, you know, you have to feel like you have to project and be and to direct the actors.
Mm-hmm.
And as I get older as a director, I find if I don't have to say anything, I don't speak. You know what I mean? Especially to, you know, or try to figure out what does the actor need. Some actors need to talk, and you do that. But to my younger self, I would say, you don't have to act like the director. You are the director.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And so, you know, on a practical standpoint, just being on set, you know, that is something that I would say to my younger self, relax a little bit, you know. You know, and that's, you know, a sort of a key thing, because you don't know, because no one knows how to be that director. People are still discovering, like, how do I be a director, you know?
Yeah. Different ways to be a director, right?
There's
Some
so many different.
You got to come on set and yell at people and work hard and like, you know, get them to the edge of insanity. You'll get what you need out of them. And then there are many directors, often women, I will say, who say, we're just going to work regular hours, got to get home to our families, we're going to have a proper time, and we're going to be civilized. You know, we're going to act, this is our job.
Yeah.
It's not like, you know, you're not at war, you know.
Right, you know, yeah.
They go in a battle in Vietnam or something, and it's not that.
Yeah, and just like, you know, relax, you know. You don't have to be the big shot.
Yeah, yeah. All right, here's a question from Huy Muller, I believe. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Do you storyboard the entire script, or do you prefer to come to set and then figure out how to shoot it?
When I make my films, I storyboard and prep everything, because I feel like I need to prep everything. I need to storyboard the whole movie. I need to prep the whole movie. I need to understand what every single scene's about. So I do that as a filmmaker, as a director of television. Sometimes I prep, but I don't prep to the same extent, because I've done it, and I feel like I've done it enough time, and I have my muscle memory and my reflexes in terms of, okay, we have this restaurant for 3.5 hours, and we have a two-hander at a table, that we have to shoot 3 pages, and we have to be out of here by noon. I don't, like, some of that stuff I don't have to prep.
Right.
Because I just know.
You know how you're going to shoot that.
I know I'm going to shoot it. Like I've walked the set. I know the set. As soon as the actors come on set, it's like, block it out, depending on who the actor is. If they, sort of try to create, I try to create the set the way that I know I want it. So I get to set early, usually an hour before anyone else shows up, create the set the way that I want. And then once the actors and the crew come along, I kind of design it in a way that there's only one way that the scene could go. Okay. So I designed it for myself. And then I know, okay, this is going to be a 2-shot over here. I'm going to do a little push there and a push there, and do a big master, and then we're just to tell everybody where we are, because we've spent all this money for this fancy restaurant, so we should probably see it.
Although you can also get very fancy with a simple two-hander in a restaurant.
Absolutely.
Like, think of Goodfellas with a kind of the push zoom effect, that scene, or Heat. Michael Mann got very fancy with De Niro and Pacino in that. So you could play as well, but I guess the point is what you're going to do. Yeah,
and like, what is the scene about? Where does the scene land in the story, and what is it? Because I'm always asking myself, what is the scene about, and how do I communicate it visually? If there was no dialogue in the scene, how do I communicate to the audience what the dynamics are in the scene, what the conflicts are in the scene? You talk about the Goodfellas scene. Is that was a moment of great change in the story, and so the push and Dolly's and the push in and the zoom out tells you something is off here, something is different here. So he's closing
in on him, like the depth of field is literally compressing against him in that moment because he's under pressure.
Exactly. And so I'm trying to figure out what is the scene about, and how do I communicate it visually. And sometimes and I cheat. Sometimes I'm like, okay, how would Hitchcock do this scene, or how would Spielberg? Because sometimes you get into a bind, and you have an hour to shoot a scene, and you think, okay, well, how would Spielberg shoot this? One in a one with one pop. So you start to ask yourself these, because I've watched, I try to watch so many films and watch different filmmakers and different cultural and different references, so that when I'm on the set, I try to be in a zone where I'm in tune. So I'm always, a moment from my own personal life comes into the scene, an image from another movie comes into the scene, so you're constantly drawing on all these experiences. And sometimes I get into that place of just, and then, shooting a scene, and then afterwards I realize, oh, right, that's from such and such. That's from The Warriors.
You've absorbed that because of all those DVDs you got behind you. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I've absorbed all that sort of imagery.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question related from Ivan. Outside of the film and television medium, where else do you draw inspiration for your voice and your work?
Music.
Okay.
I find that music affects me, and it sets a tone and a mood. A great 3-minute, a great pop song, a great, Marley song that's 3.5 minutes. A great, record, like say, Massive Attack, Mezzanine, that is cinematic. A great soundtrack, like Under the Skin. So I look to I look to music for inspiration. When I'm prepping films, I'm always looking at photographs, looking at paintings to try to find color and framing and design of how what the film I'm prepping, how that film could be. So I'm constantly drawing from other art forms to kind of inform the work that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Jilla Dilipa, I think, asks, do you have any books or films you recommend to better understand the struggles of Black people in Canada? I guess you could start with Brother or Book of Negroes. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say, Brother is a great read.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone hasn't read it, it's by David Echeriandi. The Book of Negroes is a great read. George Elliott Clark is a great writer from out of Nova Scotia. Dion Brand, of course, is one of our seminal writers. Austin Clark is probably
There's a lot.
There's a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
That's Lawrence. There's a lot of folks out there.
Mm-hmm. All right, so a lot of questions here. We've only got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get to some more. There's a sort of tech question here along the same lines as the storyboarding question. As a writer, do you outline before you write the script? Is it important for you to know the whole story before beginning, or do you make your way through and see where the story wants to go?
I do outline. I tend to need to know what my ending is, what the end of the story is, before I write. Because I've tried it the other way, and I find I get lost and I kind of meander. But if I know what I'm working towards, it makes it a lot easier. So I usually have a notebook, and I usually just write any ideas that come to me. Scenes, images, scene ideas, a song, an actor, a scene from a movie. And once I've stored enough of that, and it usually takes a couple months, 2 or 3 months of just kind of gathering all that information, I tend to just start to write, and I tend to start at the beginning and just write all the way through. I never go back. I tend to just start at the beginning and I write all the way through until the very end.
Yeah.
And then, if something occurs to me about a change in the beginning, I make a note to myself in my book. But I'm trying to get to the end.
Right.
And then once I get to the end, I go back to the beginning and I start to kind of do what you were talking about, which is don't assume someone's attention, which is, I start to kind of comb through the work, and I do that, 3 or 4 times where I'm constantly saying, what is the scene about? Why is someone reading this scene? How am I going to get them to turn that page?
Right.
How am I going to get a random stranger who just doesn't know anything about me, who doesn't know anything about my script? How am I going to get them to turn that page to the next scene? And so they keep turning the page all the way until the end. So that's my process. I outline, start at the beginning, and go all the way through, and I just keep rewriting until I have a script that is tight enough and economical enough. And that comes from working from editing, because when you edit a movie, you shoot all the stuff, you realize, why did I shoot all this stuff? you cut out, like scenes that were very hard to get, you cut out of your movie.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to do that, at this script stage, really kind of do that work now.
That's good. I think that's a great point about writing from the beginning all the way to the end before you go back, because it's so easy to second guess yourself as you're going and to edit as you go, and then you can find yourself just getting like you're just like stuck and you don't actually get to the end because you're still fixing what you've just written.
Exactly.
Here's a question from Vanessa Shaw. My question: I will watch a show over and over because I can't let go of a character. Mad Men, she gives it as an example. Do you have a character that you can't let go of?
When I wrote Aminata, Lawrence Hill wrote Aminata Diallo in the Book of Negroes. I find her such a fascinating character. I keep going, I want to go back to that character. So that was a character that was hard to let go of because she was such an inspiration to me. And Lawrence Hill gave us that gift with that character. And I, love to make a series of that. I love to, make a series with a version of that character, So yeah, Aminata Diallo from the Book of Negroes.
All right. Let me see. Boy, there's a lot of. I don't know if I'm gonna get all of them. I'll get to as many as I can. I'm gonna try to group some together. All right. Here's a big one. It's for both of us from Kay. Cinema was built on images cementing anti-Black violence. D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation being the first film. Not actually, but we can get to that.
Right.
How has the new liberation movement invigorated your vision for cinema? Well, you answer first.
I feel excited about making my next film. I feel excited about putting the Black experience, a Black Canadian experience on a film. I can't wait. I can't wait to do it in both film and television. I'm working on the series that's specifically American, set in New York. It's about a young woman. It's in 1946, post-World War. But I'm excited about telling her story and putting it on Netflix. And this with Brother, I just feel like there's so much, there's an immediacy right now to having authentic Black stories told that I'm glad to be a part of that, part of telling some of those stories.
Birth of a Nation is an infamous movie because it was one of the first blockbusters, not the first, but one of the first blockbusters, widely praised in racist quarters in the early part of the last century. But it wasn't the first film. You want to, go into the history of cinema, you can go to the films that Thomas Edison made, one of the inventors of the moving picture image, and movies like Watermelon Makers, short films, which were, which started some of the racist stereotypes that we are still living with now. So it's a long history in movies of racist representation, but there's also a long history of Black filmmakers telling their own stories and working against that. Oscar Micheaux and Spencer Williams, and the films that Paul Robeson made as an actor are really, key. Emperor Jones and so many others from, the early days, the silent era and the early sound era. And then more recently, all the filmmakers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Barbara Jordan and Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, so many films, Symbio, Psycho, Taxiplasm, there's so many movies that, will really blow your mind if you can actually track them down and watch them. So there is a long history of working against racist representation. One thing I would just encourage everybody to do is to track down some of those films. You can find them on, widely available streaming services now. Netflix has got some great collections of pioneering African cinema.
And Tiff had that great program that you did. Was it last fall or last summer? Yeah. Black Star. You had that great program, Black Star. Oh yeah. Saw some great films in that program.
Thank you. Yeah. So look, the movies are out there. This is a particular moment that I think people who are into film can seize on, because movies are so powerful. A lot of the ways we think about the world come through the images that are kind of implanted in our minds through movies and TV shows. Right. And one thing that I'm thinking about a lot, and I want Tiff to actually explore this a little more, is when we see cops in movies and cops in TV shows, how have all of those images, like thousands of hours we've all watched of cop shows and cop movies, how have they influenced how we think about police, or how we have thought about police maybe up till right now? Right. So, I think it's a great question in terms of, how does this moment change how we think about cinema? And I just peel that back to the power that any moving image has, and how we need to kind of examine those images all the time.
Yes. Yeah. And, and now I'm much more conscious of, I'm aware of, like, what is this image saying about Black folks. I mean, you wrote a great article back in the day. I think it was you wrote an article called "Cinema of Duty." Oh
yes, yeah, we talk a lot about that one.
Yes, you wrote, and how much duty does a Black filmmaker have to the Black experience, and do they have an obligation to telling Black stories and to represent, or do they have an obligation to their own experiences and to tell their own truth? And where do you land? Where do you land on that these days, 20 years later?
I still think it's most important for a Black filmmaker to express what's in their own mind and their own heart. Any filmmaker is going to be shaped by their environment, and if your environment includes racism, that's probably going to be a part of what shapes your vision as an artist.
Right.
So that, don't shy away from that. Thankfully, there's been so much great work that's been done since, we started out in film, in visual art, in literature, all of the different art forms, and in music especially. If you look at just this, and television, you look at the incredible flowering of Black TV, with shows like Atlanta and Insecure and so many others, Chewing Gum, that are really just blowing open the expectations of audiences for what a Black character is and isn't supposed to be.
Right.
That's what we need more of, I think.
Yeah. We need a diverse, a diverse voice of Black experiences across the board.
That's right. Okay, let me see if I can get to another couple more before we wrap up.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one, anonymous question. Clement, as you build trust with cast and crew, did you ever encounter someone who was problematic, and how did you overcome? Also, do you find that you picked up problem-solving skills with working with different personalities that help with building your trust with them?
Yeah, I've worked with casts that have been challenging, that you have to figure out what is it that they need. What is it that cast member needs? It's like working with anyone. And part of it is to find out, like, what is it? Oftentimes it's about fear, you know what I mean? And what is it that they're afraid of? And so I try to create an environment and create a space that the actor feels safe. Sometimes I've had experiences where there's nothing that you could do about it. The actor, that person has some other, chemical issues that they're dealing with. And that's been rare. I've rarely had those sort of experiences. But I've kind of developed a skill where I can navigate and negotiate and allow people to talk, because sometimes actors just want to feel scared and nervous. They just need to vent.
Yes.
And then they feel like they need for you to look them in the eye and be open to them and just allow them that space to talk.
Yeah.
And I find that's a skill that I've kind of developed, over time.
Related question, this one's for me, but I know you as a very good negotiator. And I know that a big part of directing, which maybe is not acknowledged enough, is negotiating.
Right?
Constantly, you got to negotiate with people who've got the money, with actors, with your distributor, with people on set, with people you want to do things a certain way and it's not quite working. And what kind of skills have you learned as a negotiator in the years you've been working as a filmmaker?
The biggest thing I've learned is listening. Really, the ability to don't feel like you have to say anything. The ability to be comfortable with silence. Because sometimes if you get comfortable, I find if you get comfortable with silence, then you could actually talk. You know, I mean, what I mean by that is that if you're in a space and someone, you know, someone doesn't want to talk right now, like you don't feel like you have to encourage them to talk. Just allow them that space to like be to come to that place where they want to talk, where they want to negotiate. You know, and also being consistent. I remember when I did a TV show, and one of the crew members came up to me and said, you know, I love seeing your hat. And what he meant by that, I couldn't figure out what he meant by that. Was every day I would wear the same hat.
Oh.
Right, I would wear the same baseball cap.
Right.
And I would come to set, and he would know, and so they'd know there is a consistency. You know what you're gonna get.
It's reassuring.
It's reassuring.
Huh.
And I thought about that. It's like a sense of reassurance. You know.
Interesting. Because so is uncertain on a set, right? You don't know if you're day and everything.
Right, and so I think people want to, as a director, they want to look because the world is so uncertain and the environment is so uncertain. They're looking for individuals that have a sense of certainty.
Huh.
And if you have that sense of certainty and a sense of consistency, you gain confidence and trust in people because they know what they're going to get.
All right, I think that's a very good place to end it.
Good.
Thank you very much. We're going to hand it back to Hans now. Thanks for taking the time for the conversation. Really some great insights there.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this, Cameron.
Of course, my pleasure. Hans, thank you as well.
Oh, well, thanks to both of you. That was absolutely fantastic on so many different levels. Thanks for joining us, Clement and Cameron. Really amazing conversation. And thanks to all of you for joining us as audience. Join us tomorrow night for a masterclass with Oscar-winning history-making production designer of Black Panther, Hannah Beachler, and then Thursday, prolific director and actor Helen Shaver. It continues to be an amazing ride, and we hope it's providing some relief, some entertainment, and no doubt some inspiration in these incredibly challenging times. Be safe and be well, and have a great night. Cameron, Clement, thank you so much for spending this time with us. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hans. See you, Clement.
Yeah, all right, Cameron, talk to you.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.